You know, there's nothing like fishing on the quiet river. I remember when I was a kid, my grandpa taught me how to fish. We'd get up early in the morning and go out, shovel, find some worms. He'd take me down by the creek and we'd figure out how to tie the bait on, and that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of quiet. We'd put a floater on, just sit back and talk and listen to the stories that he had to tell. And it reminds me, I was in town today and there was a fishing show, and I went in, and it seems that they were having a bunch of workshops there and people were spending a lot of money to get a lot of information. And yet, when it was all said and done, they walked out quite confused.
Are you gonna help me catch a fish?
That may be beyond my abilities at the moment.
You see what I mean? You can learn a lot about tying knots and stream currents and different things and never learn how to catch a fish. It's the same way in stormwater education. You know, you can go to those conventions and you can spend a lot of money and you can get a lot of information and a lot of brochures and things and never have any practical application. And that's why we want to have Stormwater Awareness Week, September the 21st to the 25th, where we give you practical, hands-on application in the field so that you know what we're talking about when we talk about BMPs. And guess what? It's at no cost. So, it's time to stop spending money and start catching fish.
Welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week 2015. And I'm John Taraskis. I'm your host for today's keynote session. And this has been quite a week. We've been having a lot of fun. As you probably have seen, there are 70 workshops being offered this week, all free of charge, all over California. Southern California all the way up to Arcata on the very border of California and Oregon. So it's been a great time. Lots of good education happening. And today we have a great treat for you. We got Laurel Warddrip with the State Water Board joining us. And so we're going to be talking about the industrial general permit. And I'm sure there's lots of questions. So we're actually opening this up to an extended time of question and answers from all of you. So we're already seeing that many of you have been submitting questions. You will notice right there on the panel, the workshop panel that you're watching, right below the video screen is a box where you can be typing in questions. So as you think of them, or if you already have a question, go ahead and enter it in. And during part 2 of today's broadcast, we are going to be taking your questions. So we hope that you can take part not only in today's broadcast, but in the other broadcasts that will be happening on Friday, and the live workshops being offered all throughout the week. And as we say around here, stormwater education should not be big business. So as we mentioned, this is a live broadcast. And if you have any technical problems, couple tips: you can pause the video and then restart it. Lots of times that'll take care of it for you, or set it back just a little bit, a few seconds. That will also help. But if you have to leave us for any reason or you get disconnected, don't worry. This broadcast is being recorded, and so you'll be able to watch it at any time, starting immediately after the broadcast. So if you know somebody who missed today's broadcast, be sure to let them know about it. All right. Well, as I mentioned, today we have Laurel Warddrip with the State Water Resource Control Board, who is the unit chief for the construction and the industrial programs. And Laurel, you've worked with the State Water Resources Control Board since 2008, and you have been developing these stormwater permits, particularly the industrial, which we're going to be talking about today. So you hold a Bachelor's of Science in Ecology and Biology from UC Santa Cruz. And you're also currently completing your associate degree in Geographic Information Systems.
Yes, it's been a long program.
Good. So I want to welcome you to today's program, and thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you for having me.
And so, as we mentioned, we're going to be doing some questions and answers, but also first, a quick disclaimer. We want everybody to know that this is program's meant to be educational and a good resource for them, but of course we have a little bit of a legal disclaimer about this Q&A time. And the bottom line is this is not meant to be an official FAQ session. So Although Laurel's is certainly very knowledgeable about the industrial general permit, she is just a water board staff member, and for views expressed by her, it will be just that, from a water board staff member. So the the State Water Resource Control Board does not guarantee the accuracy of the information being presented today's broadcast, and accepts no responsibility for the consequences of the use. Terminology used today may not necessarily be consistent with the official terms of the State Water Resources Control Board. And so, as always, for specific compliance guidance, what you should do is contact either the State Water Resources Control Board or their regional board staff in writing and get an official interpretation of the permit or compliance opinion from them. So again, thank you for being a part of this. I am sure, even with that disclaimer, this is going to be a very informational hour for industrial general permittees. And I know we have quite a few people joining us today from all over California, different industry sectors, and so we're already seeing that we're getting quite a few questions. So first off, we're going to start this part of the broadcast just talking about this new industrial general permit. It became effective July 1st this year.
That's correct.
And so in California, what are we seeing so far as people getting on board with this permit?
So we haven't hit the wet season yet, but everyone's been learning a new database, and learning a new database or technology is very challenging for our industrial facilities. We have about 10,000 of them, but they're not database programmers or computer people by trade. They're industrial facilities doing auto dismantling or chemical manufacturing. So learning a new database and everything going electronic has been a real challenge for the board to provide assistance, as well as a challenge for people to comply.
Okay, so yeah, just a lot of new technology and new systems to get used to.
And having one date for everybody, July 1st was the deadline to electronically file. We extended it to August 14th, but it's still hard for people to do that.
And as far as getting, who the state thinks should have a permit, how is that going? Are there first off, are there new categories or new groups of industrial activities that are being added to this permit?
So we haven't added any or expanded the industrial codes that need this permit. They're the same as the 97 permit. But what's happening is, with the new regulations being, now effective after 17 years, new people are learning that they needed coverage under the old permit, or it has to do with the no exposure certification. Individuals had to self-certify in the past. Now they have to tell the board. So they're really trying to figure out, do I qualify for the NEC, or do I need a notice of intent?
Are there any particular industry groups that you're seeing maybe are somewhat lacking in representation in this permit?
The agriculture, manufacturing, for example, wineries, they're really trying to understand the regulations, and the board's been doing a lot of outreach and assistance with what the regulations mean and what they can do and their options to comply.
And how are you outreaching to let's say, wineries? How are you reaching out to them?
We met with some of the wine industry representatives and talked about some compliance options with their sites, and we did a webinar where everyone was welcome to attend, and we recorded it so that we could share it with industrial facilities that are, wine manufacturers could view it after the webcast, because it was during Crush. So we still had a lot of people call in and listen, and we've also been providing consistent guidance, getting all the regional boards on the same page for what our options are, and just providing, that kind of guidance to facilities.
So this webinar, where can they find that?
So right now that's a great question. I haven't posted it on the website.
Coming soon.
But they can absolutely email me for it. Anybody can email me and I send it right away.
All right, well, good. So with this permit not being issued in a decade, as we mentioned, there's many groups that are determining, do they need to be covered under this permit? Do they not be covered under this permit? How would a industrial facility make a determination whether this permit is applicable to them or not?
Yeah, it's a real interesting part of the program is who needs a permit. sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's, that one facility may not, but their next door neighbor is a regulated activity and they need a permit. They both have pollutants. So we are very stuck to the industrial classification code system, the SIC code system as we say. And what they can look at is attachment A in the industrial general permit, which talks about the categories that need the permit. And they can also look at the industrial codes online so that they can go look at what that code would mean. And everyone has a code. And then they can also watch the SIC code video we have on our website that WGR filmed for us.
And that's in your toolbox, I
Yes.
believe. Good.
And that's been really useful for cities because when they do their non-compliance inspections, it helps them understand the SIC codes, which has been kind of a black hole for people for
it can
almost
get a
20
little,
years.
can get a little complicated.
Yeah, I would only caution that you really need to talk to the state board and your region about what you're actually doing if you qualify.
Okay. And so once they determine they need to be under this permit, then they need to register by filing a notice of intent or permit registration documents, and that's done on the state SMART system.
Correct.
There were some challenges with the SMART system this year. Has the state been able to work those out? And also, are you getting maybe educational resources to tell everybody how to use the system?
Sure, sorry for the word, but we did have some challenges with the SMART system, and if somebody needs a permit, they need to do everything electronic now. The no exposure certifications, the terminations, the notice of intent, and the notice of non-applicabilities. And what we've done is we've upgraded our geographic information system servers. The database staff in the Division of Information Technology has capped the user rate so that only a certain number of users can get it in at a time. And that means that if you're going to be able to do what you need to do to comply at that point in time. But the server rates have dropped after August 14th. We're in good shape and haven't had any problems since July 1st.
It really depends what deadline we're
Yeah.
reaching. It's not just industrial deadlines, because also construction, municipal use it. So probably around October 15th with the municipal deadline, we might be seeing a little more traffic.
It's been a learning process because we've always had a contractor do most of the work, and now Division of Information Technology with the board is doing it, so they're learning how to manage it. We have a matrix load matrix for the program so that they know at any given time what our timelines are, so they know when there's going to be peak user rates in the system.
Okay.
So for the other permits, they have a server capacity matrix.
And I know you helped put together a fact sheet on how to use smarts, and they can people can download that from the website.
Yes, we put together about a 50-page help guide for the industrial stormwater users. And it goes through everything you have to do in the database and screenshots so that you can really follow along and understand what you have to do.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, speaking of those who need to come under this permit, there is this category called new dischargers in the permit. And what is a new discharger? Could you tell us a little bit about that, and what do they need to do in order to get coverage under the permit?
Sure. A new discharger is for the terms of this permit, they're an industrial facility who are discharging after August 13th of 1979. They are not a facility that the EPA has given a effluent limitation guideline or a subchapter N facility. And they also haven't had NPDES industrial stormwater permit coverage in prior years. And it's not at the business, it's at the site. So we have three types of new dischargers, and a lot of people, they may not be considered new dischargers. For example, some wineries were built in the 50s or the 60s. Maybe they didn't know about this permit, but they wouldn't necessarily be a new discharger.
Oh, that's very good, yeah. Okay, so then they would not have to go through that process.
Correct. So what would happen is if you are a new discharger, and the most common one is that you open a new facility or you buy a facility and change the operation, and so that the prior NPDES permit coverage wouldn't apply, then you answer a series of questions in SMARTS about your receiving waters and where your stormwater goes. Do you directly go into an impaired water body, or do you discharge to a municipal separate storm system that directly goes to an impaired water body? If you say yes, and it's a discharger's self-certifying program, if they say yes, then the system's going to ask them to get a QISP to determine some site factors for those impairments.
And when you say impaired water body, how will they know that? And what is an impaired water body, I guess, and how will they know that?
So for new dischargers, they would look at where their water goes. They're required to know where their stormwater goes, which receiving water or waters of the U.S. it goes to, and they would look that up in our Appendix 3. And if it's impaired, that would tell them if they need a QISP or not. And for existing dischargers, we'll talk about those a little bit later.
Okay.
So what would happen is they'd sign up a QISP. We have 134 of them right now. And the QISP would come out and do an evaluation if the pollutant that the water body is impaired for is present at the industrial facility, or is it exposed at the industrial facility, and if it is there and it is exposed, do they discharge it to exceed any applicable water quality standard at the end of pipe. And so that is more of a BMP analysis, and the QISP will come up with a recommendation to put back into SMARTS.
Now, is it true, it seems to be in the permit that it says that if they do discharge to those impairments to an impaired water body, that they could actually be denied permit coverage. Is that true, and how would that work?
It's a great question. I think that it can happen, but I think we're more the type of agency to work through these things with dischargers and understand what's going on before we denied permit coverage. So that's yet to be seen about what will happen. Nobody's been denied permit coverage yet.
Okay, and so they would work with the water board and also the regional boards.
And we try to understand which is it. Is it that you can't afford the no exposure kind of installations for the pollutant, or is it that the treatment is infeasible, or what is it? And we'll work through what to do. I also want to make sure everyone knows that when we're talking about the pollutants for new dischargers, we're talking about pollutants generated from industrial activity, not non-industrial pollutants.
Okay.
So these are directly related to your industrial activity.
Okay. Well, you had mentioned that new dischargers need to get assistance from a QISP or a QISP. What is a QISP?
So a QISP is something we haven't seen too much of yet, but it's coming soon. We have QISP requirements in the new permit. It's a new certification program similar to the Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioner program in the construction permit. And these individuals will be helping dischargers in Level 1 and Level 2 who have exceedances of parameters, as well as new dischargers who need some technical assistance with their BMPs if they're discharging to impaired water bodies. And a QISP will go through a state-sponsored training, part online, part in person, and they'll get a certification at the end.
Right, but that training has not yet come out, right?
No.
When do you expect the QISP training to come out?
For everyone who's not a trainer of record, it should be the beginning of 2016.
Okay, so there are some QISP, and you mentioned they're trainer of records. What is that, and how did they become one?
It's a good question.
Can somebody else become a trainer of record?
Yeah, those are good questions. We have a list on the CASQA website, and we did a request for qualifications, and everyone who met the minimum criteria could apply. And then they came to Sacramento for a 2-day intensive training where we went through everything that a TOR should know. And then they got their certification if they met all of the steps of becoming a TOR. And we have around 134 that made the cut and actually went through the whole process.
So currently a few QISPs are needed because of these new dischargers, and there are 130-something available.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they've been doing these new discharger claims. I've heard a little bit about it. And so then we'll need more QISPs as Level 1 comes in 2016.
Okay. One common question that we've been seeing quite a bit about is about watersheds and impairments. You were just talking about impairments. I guess there's a lot of confusion or just needs more clarity on what is a watershed and what does the water board mean when they refer to a watershed specifically? What are you talking about?
Sure. A watershed is where you have water flowing off of a land surface and it collects somewhere at a point. And so there's a lot of different cuts you can take at a watershed, different hydrologic unit or HUCs that you can describe. And depending on the size, you're going to see different trends. And so with the regional board's assistance, we picked the HUC 10 as the watershed in the industrial permit. And if you're an existing discharger, which means you have permit coverage, you're required to do a pollutant source analysis at your site. It's been that way since the 90s.
And that's a part of your SWIP development?
Correct.
Okay.
And part of that is also looking at, hey, does your industrial facilities contribute any of these pollutants, these pollutants in the impairments of the watershed? So what you do to find that is you go into SMARTS, you go to your additional facility info tab for your notice of intents, because that's the only permit it applies to, coverage. And then you see what pollutants are in your watershed. We built a GIS tool, Geographic Information System tool, to make that very easy for people. And so it'll tell them the pollutants, and you just go down the list, and if you have that industrial pollutant that you're generating, you just have to sample for it,
Okay.
which you should be already, because it's an industrial pollutant. So it's not supposed to be cost prohibitive or more stringent, it's just comprehensive.
Okay, okay. So there's also a little bit of confusion about how the impairment evaluation varies between an existing discharger, which I think you were just talking about, and a new discharger. So
Right.
what's the difference there? How do they look at it differently?
So existing dischargers, it's kind of a site analysis, very general. Here's these pollutants in your watershed. Take a look at them. Do you have them? No penalties really. You just monitor for them. And then with the new dischargers, it's a permit stop, but it's very specific to their receiving water. And so it's a very narrow scope, very narrow lens, but it does have some big implications.
So it is actually their direct receiving water that they're looking at.
It's if they're directly discharging to an impaired reach
Okay.
of a receiving water, it isn't a tributary kind of a scenario, or it goes through an MS4 that goes directly into an impaired reach.
Okay.
So it's very narrow, but if that's your scenario, you have to demonstrate some things with the QISP.
Okay, and there's a lot of acronyms that people
I
have to
know.
get used to. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. We're talking about a municipality, the storm drainage system
Correct.
of a municipality. Okay, so we see the facility's water goes into a city storm drain. How do they know what water body that's connecting
hard.
to? How would they find the information?
Well, so this goes back to the permit we've had for a long time. People are supposed to know this information. They've had a lot of time to know where their water goes. If they don't know, they can call the city, they can call the regional board, or they can get a consultant to figure out what is their appropriate receiving water. A lot of the cities have the information. It's not always in a nice map. If I had all the maps
Yeah.
for the state, I tell you,
Yeah.
I'd put them up.
Yeah.
But they're going to have to do a little work to figure that.
Go into your municipality is
Yeah.
probably a good place to start, talking
It's
to
a good
Public
place to
Works,
start.
and they most likely will be able to tell you where that water's going.
Yes, they should. Because they have to manage the system, and they have the maps to, if there's a leaking pipe or something, they know
Okay.
better than anybody.
All right, so you have that facility that says, we don't discharge to a creek, and we don't discharge to an MS4, a municipality. In fact, we don't discharge at all.
Sure.
Do they need permit coverage? And do they need to tell you about it? What do they need to do for that type of facility?
So if a facility is claiming that they do not discharge to Waters United States, basically that means that the NPDES permit, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, doesn't apply to them.
And what's waters of the United States? In
Oh.
layman's language. I know that's a very technical definition.
Yeah, it's
For the
pages
layman.
and pages long. It's a navigable water that has beneficial uses tied to it. It's a navigable water that's interstate water and the tributaries to that.
So we're talking streams,
Creeks, rivers,
It could even be a
lakes.
seasonally dry creek
Yes,
bed.
ephemeral creeks. Mojave River is
Could be
also
estuary. Okay, so we're talking a water body.
water bodies. Yes, it's state waters. It's a little different, more
Okay.
comprehensive. So if you are saying, "Hey, I don't discharge to Waters of the United States," there's other reasons why this permit might not apply to you, but just for the no discharge reasons, if you meet the standard July 1st that we have in our permit, which is the maximum historic precipitation event or series of events, whichever is greater, you don't have to file an official NONA in SMARTS. If you believe you meet the standard, the regional board can disagree, and they will let you know, and then you can file the technical report or get a notice of intent or a notice of no exposure certification. But you don't have to, not everyone will be filing a NONA technical report if they don't discharge.
And you need to get a professional engineer to back that up,
Yes.
right? Now, you talk about historical rainfall values.
I know.
You're not associating what we'd typically see a 100-year storm, or
We
was
tried.
that intentional?
Well, yes, we tried to discuss some of those things with our council, and it was inappropriate to say never discharge. How do you prove that?
Yeah.
And so when we all talked about this is what we could do legally at this time,
Okay.
is never.
So really, it will come down to the professional engineer to
Yes.
make the call, and that's why you require that certification.
And in the fact sheet, there are some minimum design storm sizes that you can consider, and you should consider when you're doing your models for running a no
Okay.
discharge report.
So if somebody,
So looking back in history for certain sizes or series.
So if somebody has a retention basin that was only sized to a 10-year, 24-hour storm event, probably not adequate.
No, it's
So
not.
you need to be pretty sure that you will not have a discharge,
Right.
even in an El Nino year.
Or, and then some of the individuals, especially in Region 6 Victorville, there's a lot of areas that have no waters of the United States. And the region's actually working through their technical reports with those dischargers of who needs the permit and who doesn't. So if you have a question about, do I need to file the NONA or not, you can call your region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been really informative. In fact, that's my questions. But I think these folks actually want to ask some of their own. So we're going to take a brief video break. In fact, we're going to show a Tips for SWIPs video on how to determine the impairments using a 303D list. And after this will be about a 6-7 minute video. We'll be back answering some of your questions. Hopefully we'll get to as many as we can. And so during this video break, if you haven't done so already, type in your questions. We'll be checking them out, and so we'll be back right after this.
Hello everyone, thanks for watching this Tips for SWIPs video. My name is Mike Callahan, I work for WGR. I will be telling you today about the 303D watershed impairments list. So this is in our SWIP template. We have a pollution narrative, and we will be listing out the 303D list impairments. We will not be going over the TRI reporting chemicals or the attachment E TMDLs in this video, and we'll be covering those in other videos. So, the 303D list. What is it? Where can we find it? All that stuff. We're going to need to go to the State Water Resources Control Board website. From there, you're going to want to go to the Industrial Stormwater Program section. In that, you can find the new Industrial General Permit. You're going to want to download this to save you time later. So, once you go to the Industrial Permit, I have mine here to save us some time. You're going to want to go to the bottom of the permit. That's where we're going to find the information on the 303D list. You can either do this with the scroll bar or by hitting the End button, which is next to your Delete button on your keyboard. Go to the very last paragraph, and it talks about the Excel spreadsheet containing the water bodies with 303D impairments. To view the attachment from this electronic PDF version, left-click on the paperclip icon to the left of this PDF file. Here's the paperclip they're talking about. If you click on it, it then gives you all the attachments for this general permit. We want the last one. This is the 303D spreadsheet. Again, you're going to want to download this because this will save you time in the future. So, I've already done that. And here's this scary looking 303D list. How do we start? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do is narrow your search with this, the region name. If you don't know the region that your facility is in, you can go back to the State Water Resources Control Board website, and they actually have a map. So to find this map more directly, you can either pause the video now and copy this web address, or by clicking on the box at the bottom of the video. So here's our map of California with all of the regions. You can either type in the address of your facility here, or if you know where it is, our hypothetical company is actually in Lodi, California. You can just zoom in on the map. So there's Stockton, there's Elk Grove. Here's Lodi. So Lodi will be in this purple region. Left click on the purple region and it'll give you the information about it. So this is the Central Valley Region Water Quality Control Board, specifically the Sacramento office. But we don't need that for our 303D list purposes. We just need that it's the Central Valley. So go back to your 303D list, click the region name tab, and then to operate this scary looking checkboxes, you're going to want to hit select all. This will unselect the unappropriate regions, and then you just select the ones we need. So ours is Region Board 5, Central Valley, and hit OK. This will then narrow our search. Now, what you're going to want to do, or this is what I do, is I create a separate document with all of our facilities' impaired waters. You find these impaired waters from the HUC 10, which we actually talk about in our HUC 10 video. So I would go check that out first if you haven't yet. So for our company, the only one we have is the McCallum River. If we had more, I would list them here. So going back to the 303D list, you'll go to the water body name, hit the same looking button, which gives you this big scary list again. Hit the select all to unselect all the ones we don't need and start searching for your water bodies. So there it is, McCallum River. This will have all of them selected again sometimes, so you're going to want to unselect all of the inappropriate ones and just select the ones we need and hit OK. This will then bring up only the information about your water body. The information we're specifically interested about is this column here, the pollutants. So you're going to want to copy this column by left clicking and dragging over the whole thing. See here, this in red? We're not going to need this because we can't search for an unknown toxicity, but I just copy all of it anyway. Copy. I go to the document I created earlier, and then you're going to want to paste it. Now the problem is if you paste like normal or just use the keyboard shortcut, it'll copy it with all of the information, including the big old ugly boxes that we got from the Excel file. What we're going to want to do is go to the last option, the one with the little A on it, because that will just copy the text, and that's all we need. So now that we have just the impairment, we can find unknown toxicity because it was in red, delete that, and now I split the screen to make it a little easier for me. So I'm going to split this to the left, and then open my SWIP. I'm going to split it to the right. And now we have all of our impairments. I'll copy them here, the new list without the ones that are in red, and then paste them into my SWIP in the appropriate section. Again, you don't want to just paste it like normal and it could mess up your formatting. Pasting with just the text will keep the formatting that you have in your document. So if there is any other water bodies in your HUC 10 or for your facility, will have multiple more lists of impairments. You don't need to copy all of them in and have multiple of the same chemical or same impairment multiple times. You just need to take all of the unique ones and put them into your SWIP. And then that's all that there is to it. Thank you for watching this Tips for SWIPs.
Welcome back to part 2, and boy, we have been getting a ton of questions, haven't we, Laurel? We spent that full 7 minutes just looking at the questions, and there's some really good ones.
And they're still coming in.
Yeah, there's some good ones. So we're going to try to get to as many as we can. So we might actually keep the responses somewhat brief, just so we can get as many, and we'll try to point people in the right place to look to also find a more detailed answer to that question? Well, for the first one, per Attachment A, oil and gas exploration, production, processing facilities that discharge stormwater contaminated by contact or that has come into contact with any overburden is covered by the permit. So the question is this: are we exempt if we have BMPs in place that do not let our oil and gas production facilities be contaminated or contaminate the stormwater by contact?
So there is a federal exemption for uncontaminated stormwater from oil and gas facilities, and the exemption is in regards to the industrial permit. If you are not discharging contaminated stormwater from your oil and gas operations, you do not need to obtain coverage. We have not changed the federal regulations. We don't have authority to do that. The permit language is less clear, and I apologize for that, but the federal exemption is still there. If you have appropriate BMPs to not allow contaminated stormwater from leaving your site, that's correct. You could qualify for that exemption.
All right, very good. How about next one here? Does DEF, I think they mean DEF, diesel emissions fluid, need to be covered or in secondary containment?
If you're trying to do the no exposure certification, then yeah, it's an industrial pollutant, so you'd be following the no exposure certification requirements or the NOI minimum BMPs for that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is it doesn't matter what the liquid is or the pollutant source, there are minimum mandatory BMPs that include covering in secondary containment.
Yeah, it's in the permit.
Okay, here's one that's maybe a little more on statistics. How many NOVs or NOTs, I think that's what they mean, have been given out since July 1st during the stormwater inspections by the regional boards? Is there any way to know that or find out that information?
So the notice to comply and the notice violations, we are going through the process for who we're going to be sending those violations to, and I'm assuming that this is for failure to obtain coverage, because that's the first thing up. If you didn't recertify by August 14th, you may get a notice. It's going to be a process, and none of those notices have gone out yet. And if you want to track it, if you do a public records request for the list of people who haven't recertified yet, we've had a couple people ask for that, you might get an idea for who has not recertified.
Okay.
But that list changes daily, so careful.
Okay, so another question, what are the requirements for an NEC, no exposure certification, and how do you qualify? I guess maybe this one, there's a lot to this question.
Yeah.
We should maybe point them in the right direction.
So there's a whole section in the permit on the no exposure certification. I encourage you to read that. We have a brochure in the toolbox introducing the NEC, and we also have a whole appendix of frequently asked questions in the permit on the NEC. But in general, it's where you have stormwater discharges, but none of them come into contact with your industrial activities or materials.
Okay. Yeah, the next question we have on a qualifying storm event and also on when someone should sample. Does 48 hours, does that include Saturday and Sunday if the facility does not operate on these days and is not scheduled operating hours?
Yeah, the prerequisite, the antecedent no discharge period, it can be on weekends. It doesn't have to be during scheduled facility operating hours.
Okay. A question here about applying for coverage. Will a company be in trouble or get fined for not submitting an NOI and if they weren't aware of the requirement to do so?
So if the permit applies to you, be sure first. If it does, yes, somebody could either sue you or we could come out and give you a notice of violation for not getting coverage. Especially since you know about it now, you might want to do some research to figure out if it's applicable to you and how you would come under compliance.
Okay. All right, next question is on the impairments we were talking about before the break, and also the video talked to this a little bit. How will SMARTS accommodate for pollutants related to 303D impairments, such as pathogens or pesticides, that are not listed under Table 2 in the permit? So in other words, if a discharger directly discharges to impaired water body listed for pesticides and the facility has pesticides on site, will SMART's data entry ad hoc have an empty field to allow for entry of a pesticide?
So this will be a work through a little bit. If you know what 40 CFR 136.3 methods you're going to be doing for pesticides, shoot me an email with those and we get them put into smarts as long as they're logical. We've had some that don't quite make sense or they've been removed by the EPA. So we do a little fact checking and then they go into smarts. We've done about 10 of these. So let me know what they are and we'll try to get them into smarts.
Okay.
And I would also, in the question, I just want to make sure if you have pesticides on site, that doesn't necessarily mean they're from your industrial activity. So be really careful that it's the industrial generated pollutants, not just that you have pesticides on your site.
Air deposition or something
Or
like
just
that.
from your landscaping,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so that's a little misleading.
Okay, very good. Next one, for a notice of termination submitted to a regional water quality control board on June 30th, should they expect to receive a response? When should they get a response?
They should get a response. I would keep checking with the region. I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I don't know which region or what the history is. If you are having trouble with staff, somebody could be on vacation or something, so I would go up the chain until you get someone's attention on that local matter.
And there's quite a backlog on their
Yes.
workload. There's a lot of...
We're all
lot of-
backlogged.
yeah. Okay. Okay, so here's a question, maybe a little bit of, it's an LRP question. If the company leases the facility, how will it be divided and identified between the landlord and the tenant responsibilities?
So when it comes to who needs to get the permit, it's usually the operator of the business. In some limited cases, the person who owns the property for industrial actually gets the permit on behalf of the business owner. I don't recommend it unless it's a very limited case, but if you have something like that, you'd have to have a legal agreement as the landowner or building owner that the business owner will comply with your permit. So it can get pretty dicey. So in general, you should be getting the permit for your business operation.
Okay. Okay. You had mentioned about 134 QIS. There are 134 QISPs at this time. The folks who, and these are the folks that went through the tour process. Will there be another opportunity to become a trainer of record? And if so, how will they know? When will that happen?
Okay, so we're discussing that on Thursday with the IGP training team, and we are planning on doing another round. We're hoping for definitely by the end of this year. I don't have a date for you yet, though. Sorry, John.
So Casca helps coordinate a lot of this. Maybe they
Yes.
should just watch the Casca website. And
Yeah, we'll put out what we call a LIRIS list, an email list to everyone who's on the industrial LIRIS and tell them there's an RFQ out.
And in order to get on that list, they can just go to the Water Board's website and sign up.
Subscribe online to our industrial page and enter your email, find the water quality industrial permitting, and sign up. You'll get all of the updates.
Okay. All right, I think this is a monitoring question. Who do we ask to find out where storm drains go out to? Oh, I guess, no, this is more where we were talking about in the first part. Especially if it's going off-site underground into
I
a
know.
municipal system. We talked a little bit about this before, but if you could talk to it again.
I'll just reiterate, the cities or the city or county will be the best bet for knowing where their systems go, how they're connected underground, and then you can ask the region. It might be in some of the municipal permits, and then you can ask a consultant who can go out and find that information for you. You can try State Board, but we're going to just usually tell you to call the city.
Okay. Next question is about landfills. And it
Oh.
says, can the regional boards have or be discretionary in requiring industrial general permit coverage for capped and closed landfills? I think that's one of the ones that is, if I remember right, exempt is capped and closed, but I
What?
believe it was, well, what is the regional board's role in that?
Sure, if you have a closed landfill, meaning that they no longer take waste, they're done with that activity, and it's been closed, capped, they're doing groundwater monitoring and all those things, and the cap is stable, that's when you go and say, hey, regional board, I'd like to terminate my industrial permit coverage. And it's a regional board discretion on what they require to terminate that, but usually it's that the cap is not stabilized.
Yeah, they're looking
Or there's other
for
issues going
erosion
on.
issues, exposure to the pollutants under the cap. Okay.
And then a lot of
Leachate
times,
issues maybe?
yeah, and then a lot of times they build another facility on top of the cap, and so sometimes it's just a different type of business that needs a permit, but the landfill doesn't need the permit anymore.
Okay, very good. When will, we knew this question would come up, ERAs. When will level 1 and level 2 be scheduled to ensure our company follows proper procedures in the permit? So you're talking about ERAs, the level 1,
Sure.
level 2, and we'll talk about baseline too. What's the
Yeah.
process?
Oh, okay. I was wondering what schedule meant. So basically, this is almost the start of the wet season, and there is no official wet season anymore, but it's going to start raining, we hope.
Yeah, we hope.
We hope, and I know some people don't want it, but we all need water. So you're going to have to start monitoring, and you're going to have to start entering that data into SMARTS, and you do it 30 days after you get the results back from the lab. SMARTS is going to calculate averages or instantaneous exceedances of your data, and then you might go to level 1 if you exceed those triggers. So level 1 is July 1st of 2016, and level 2 is July 1st of 2017. So
For this first year, everybody
Everyone's a
starts
baseline.
out
Yeah.
baseline. And everybody's
exactly.
baseline until the end of the year.
correct.
And-
And they'll count the beans up.
Yeah.
We'll figure out where you fall. Did you stay in baseline? Are you going to level 1? And if you go to level 1, you'll need a QISP. But we'll have QISPs, plenty of them, before
And I
summer
think
of
that's an important
2016.
question to ask too is there anything they could do, let's say they come up with a less than desirable analytical result
Sure.
early on. They make changes.
Yeah.
Is it an average? In other words, could they do more monitoring and push it down? How would
If-
that work?
I like to see it as, it's a dynamic thing. Stormwater is very dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you sample and you have a high number, you have a chance to fix it. You can install more BMPs,
Mm-hmm.
and the next sample may bring your average down because you've done all these great things, or maybe it was a sample error. Not in the analytical side, that's really complicated, but somebody didn't know how to sample. They weren't properly
Right.
trained. So they're now trained, and lo and behold, you're actually getting great numbers. So you have a lot of opportunities. You can take more qualifying storm events if we have that much rain.
Okay.
So yeah,
Very
it's
good.
a rolling average or 2 instantaneous exceedances.
Okay, here's a question. I think it's more geared at the MS4 permit, but the interaction with the IGP. Phase 2 MS4 permittees are required to report non-filers to the regional board as a part of their Phase 2 MS4 permit. Where should MS4s direct these notices of non-filers? To the MS4 contact or IGP program contact?
So I'm assuming, well, if it's a city that has to identify non-filers, those go to the regional board. If you're a citizen and you want to direct non-filers, you can go to either one. You
Yeah.
can tell the city, or you can tell the authority, the agency, which is the state board, or the regional board. So you have a lot of options of complaints. We actually have a complaint system on our page. You can file a complaint electronically.
And I think in this question they're referencing a Phase 2 MS4 permit requirement, and that was to do an assessment of potential non-filers, and then all the permit says is reported to the regional board.
That would make sense.
So most likely you would just report it to your industrial contact. And they can just go to the regional board's website and see who the appropriate staff contacts
Yeah,
are.
and if it's a city to a regional board relationship, they probably know each other already.
Yeah. All right. Is the board looking into modifying SMARTS to allow for more search capabilities within your account? For example, will there be a way to search your list of facilities to see most recently inspected or recently uploads to the regional board or facilities themselves?
So, SMARTS. What we had on July 1st was the best that the programmers could give us to comply with the new permit. We don't have everything we want. They're working on it, though. It's just we couldn't have everything at once with a lot of back history. So we are working on the reports for internal regional board staff right now, and we're also working on the public reports for searching. I don't have a good idea yet which ones we'll exactly have. If you have some that you're really interested in, we can evaluate that, but we're not trying to make too many changes with the public search menu.
Okay. Good questions being asked. All right. If during a qualifying storm event you are only able to grab a sample from 2 of 4 outfalls, as the other 2 were not discharging within 4 hours. Do you have to sample the missed outfalls at other times during the year? And in short, do you need to sample 4 QSCs per year or sample each outfall 4 times per year?
The permit requires 4 qualifying storm event samples from each outfall.
From each outfall.
And if you just don't have a qualifying event that happens during scheduled facility operating hours for that outfall, you log that in your annual report.
Okay.
It's not a penalty if it didn't rain enough to get a discharge. It's more of an issue if you had a discharge and you're saying that it didn't rain.
Okay, and I think what's behind this question is some outfalls just flow faster than others.
Right.
And so in a light storm event, you might get those fast-flowing outfalls, and so you sample those.
Yep.
But then you get another prolonged rain event to where now finally maybe your last 2 outfalls are finally starting to discharge. The idea is that you might actually sample multiple QSCs just to get all outfalls that do
Yes.
ultimately discharge sampled.
In that case, you'd be sampling more than 4 qualifying storm events
Okay.
to get all of your samples.
All right, that's a good question, very good question. All right, next, if I find a large diesel spill during an industrial general permit inspection, what are the procedures or steps do I need to take? And does this need to be reported to the State Water Resource Control Board? If so, what department?
If you have a spill of hazardous material, you need to call DTSC, potentially even the city's QISP, and
Yeah.
you need to
Governor's
notify.
office, you got to notify.
Yeah, you have to notify the proper authorities for that spill. And if you are someone that has our coverage, you're also supposed to self-certify violations. If that spill discharged, that would definitely be an unauthorized non-stormwater discharge. You have to eliminate it. And if you have that spill, you have to actually log spills for the last 5 years. So you're going to have to be responsible for that spill for a while. So yeah, you need to call DTSC at the first,
Yeah.
and as well as
Yeah,
John's recommendations.
You may have state and national reporting requirements to do. and
Depending
then
on the size.
Agencies as well, and possibly even county. So, where do we log the results from our pH tests that are being done on site?
Oh, that's a great question. So what you're going to do, you have a meter, or you did it with the wide range litmus paper test kits for pH. And you're going to put that in smarts. You're going to look at the color, and you're going to match it to a number, and you're going to enter that number, and you're going to put that it was self, which means it was done in the field. So you're doing all of that in smarts.
Okay.
Take some pictures and don't be colorblind.
Okay. Next question is about the spacing of the sampling events. So aside from the 48 hours of dry weather, so we know you got at least 48 hours, is there any minimum time requirement between the 2 sampling events?
Well, yes, there is. So if you have a qualifying storm event at discharge location A and you take a sample, and then it's still raining and 2 hours later you go out and take another sample, those are not 2 separate QSCs.
You got to have 48 hours of dry weather.
You have to have 48 hours of no discharge in between.
No discharge, okay.
In between the events for them to be considered multiple QSCs.
And that's an important point. Lots of times just by habit we say dry weather,
I
but
know,
you're right,
yeah.
it's discharge.
Yeah, you can have sprinkling or wet ground, but if it didn't discharge, it still counts as your antecedent period.
Okay, so the answer there is it's 48 hours. There's no other spacing required.
That's right.
Okay. All right, let's see. Do dischargers have to sample SIC codes constituents for secondary and tertiary SIC codes?
Okay, so quick correction. There are no secondary or tertiary SIC codes. You can have multiple primaries. What a SIC code is your primary economic activity at your site. So it's very rare that somebody is actually doing multiple primary activities. It's usually they're doing this and they have all these pollutants because of it. And so if you have, for example, one main operation and then you have these supporting operations at the site, you're responsible for all those pollutants, so you have to sample those. If you have multiple primary SIC codes, for example, you're doing trucking and warehousing, and they're both 50-50 of the time, you would have to do all the pollutants for those. So
Okay.
if you actually have multiple SIC codes.
Okay, very good. Okay, this next question, I think we can summarize a little bit. They have some questions about what requires a SWIP, and I think what they really mean is what requires industrial general permit coverage. So questions about automobile fueling stations, aircraft parking ramps, and auto parking lots.
So I think we're talking about, maybe you can help me, are we talking about residential, like I'm using the airport, I'm dropping off my...
I think we're talking about industrial activity and also SIC. You know, a lot of what we discuss in SIC codes, you want to look at what is the classification.
So, automotive fueling stations, if you're primarily fueling vehicles as a retail service, you don't need the permit. But if you're primarily fueling vehicles as a business, it's a commercial, or you're mainly doing garbage truck fueling, yes, you need a permit. But this is a really specific question that I would have to have a lot more information to answer.
Yeah.
So you have to contact me.
Probably in general, they would want to go back to that SIC code webinar that you referenced. They should start with that in attachment A. But it is somewhat of a complicated process.
It is.
And after they work through that, maybe then get a hold of their regional board staff or you to talk through whether their specific situation needs the coverage.
Right, because a lot of times maintenance just on your equipment isn't a trigger to get coverage.
Okay.
But fueling can be a trigger.
Okay. Another question here, is it acceptable to use an electronic file as a final living SWIP? Does it have to be a hard copy?
No, but you have to allow an inspector or another agency to access a computer to look at it.
Okay.
If you're not going to have a hard copy.
Okay. And I think we already answered that question. So next one, stormwater flows, frequency and quantity. They have 6 storm drains where they get water when it has not rained for 3 days and it drizzles for 3 hours, not resulting in a quantity of water that is adequate enough to discharge. Must they wait for 3 continuous dry days before testing? Well, got a couple things we can answer there. One, a misconception about how long you have to wait.
48 hours. And so basically, if you have the asphalt in the little drains and it's kind of drizzling and there's no water leaving the site, that still can be your 48-hour period. So once it starts discharging, that's when you can you're required to take a sample. And it doesn't have to be bone dry. It can be a little damp. It's if there's no discharge for 48 hours.
Okay.
And there were some in the beginning.
Yeah, I just refreshed. We got quite a few. I can tell you right now, we're not going to get to them all. But
so now you understand my inbox at work.
Yeah. But let's ask a few more questions. We'll probably extend this another few minutes so we can get as many as we can. How do you deal with run-on from the neighbor that is conducting the same type of business? So any type of run-on that's sending pollutants to your facility, how do you deal with that?
So one, you can try to work with your neighbor and get them to, is there a shared BMP that would help you both? And if they say, get off my property, then you say, well, is there anything that I should be doing? The permit requires you to minimize run-on. And if that is too costly, you can do a level 2 demonstration in 2017 showing that most of this contribution is from your neighbor. I would also consider working with your region, making sure they have a permit and that they're being responsible with their BMPs, so maybe the water quality would be better.
Of course, they may or may not require a permit.
Well, if they did, though. Yeah. No.
Another question, how far downstream is the expectation when considering an impaired waterway?
It's direct, meaning that it runs off and that it goes directly into an impaired reach. Or through the MS4, it goes directly, there's a pipe and it goes directly into that impaired reach.
Of course, it depends, as we were talking in the first part, what context we're talking about. So if we're talking about a new discharger, that's that direct. But if we're talking about existing discharger, looking at their monitoring programs, it's the whole watershed.
Exactly. So. But like I said, no matter what the impairments are, if you have those industrial pollutants, you should already be sampling for them. I wanted to say really quick, gas stations, if they're retail gas fueling for, people that drive on Caltrans Road, they're just me or John, those do not need our permit.
Okay. If we fail one of the parameters like TSS, total suspended solids, and if we install a BMP, can we upload the new TSS readings for the next storm? And if this takes 6 times, can we upload all 6 results? And does it average out for all of those?
Yeah, if they're separate qualifying storm events, you put in BMPs and your next events are lower, and we actually get 6 rain events in that 6-month period. Well, I mean, in that year, yeah, you can do that.
So I guess what we're saying is the minimum amount of storms they have to sample are 4,
Yes.
assuming they get 4
4
qualifying.
per discharge location.
Yes, but if they elect to do more, they can report that and average their numbers down.
Well, I wouldn't say averaging numbers down. I think that if they want to fully characterize their site with more storms, there's nothing preventing that. So if they do BMPs and they want to see how it's changed their storm, it's just that once you take that sample, you have to submit it to the state.
Okay.
It's a compliance point sample.
Okay. Can you describe what qualifies as an outfall? Does storm drains, are they included? And if so, how would you take samples from a graded storm drain?
So an outfall, which we should probably get away from using that word, but a discharge location is when the stormwater associated with the industrial activity leaves your industrial area and the site in essence. So your point of compliance, sometimes it's more upstream depending on what's happening, sometimes it's actually at the storm drain. But you want to make sure it's representative of only your industrial stormwater. So they make these, some people actually put a system under the grate and then they collect it after the event, and some people have cups that they kind of shift down into the storm drain. There's a lot of ways that you can sample under the grate, but there's also ways to sample before it gets to the storm drain, which is what I recommend sometimes. So
Okay.
it just depends on the site.
There's lots of good questions here. People are asking good questions. If the facility has copper as a pollutant, what condition of non-exposure do they need to meet in order to meet the NEC requirements and to not test for it? Copper, as we know, sources for copper vary, could even be brake linings. How would they meet that? Is that a very facility-specific question? Or?
So basically, if they have copper at their site, it depends on what you're doing with the copper. Is it copper in brake pads? Is it copper that you're recycling? You know, you have to have it non-exposed. You can't store the brake pads outside. You can't take the brake pads off outside. You can't be stripping copper tubing outside, and you can't be storing it outside. So you really need to read the regulations in the permit for the NEC to look at that one.
Okay. Can I become a QISP for our own facility?
Yeah.
Once we move into level 1 or at any time?
Sure, it's a really good question. So there's no prerequisites to be a QISP. You just have to pass the exams and go through the one-day training. If you become a QISP, you can definitely represent yourself.
And that's an important part. There is no, unlike like the construction general permit, there were prerequisites. Anyone can become a QISP. But I know the industrial general permit team has warned people, or we're considering warning people, that it is a pretty difficult process. It's a pretty onerous process.
Yes, it's not a Stormwater 101 because it's designed that you're going to be helping people comply, meaning that they're going to be looking to you for compliance system. It's a very heavy task, a heavy burden on the QISP, and so we want to make sure we get good QISP, good educated QISP. So if you own a facility and you feel like you can pass, I'd call maybe me or Casqua first and just kind of run it by them, but you're more than welcome to try.
Okay. How about we take one more? And we have empty plastic 55-gallon drums, and they have been cleaned out, and all the bungs have been put back in. We're waiting for a company to pick up the empty drums. Do we need to cover them until the company picks them up? And I guess that's maybe to qualify for an NEC, or
if you have clean, empty drums outside that are closed, and they're clean, meaning you don't have industrial materials all over them, no, you don't have to cover them. They're sealed. Now, if you have broken or cracked ones, and that may prohibit that, but if you just have clean drums outside and you're waiting for them to be picked up, that's fine.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, but I really appreciate you coming
thank you.
and joining us for this broadcast. Now, as we can see, there's lots of questions.
It's okay.
And you're mentioning your email is inundated with questions. How can people find answers to their questions? And you're
Oh,
really
how
good
can
about
they-
returning emails. Can they contact you?
You can get in the queue.
Okay.
I'm trying to get them down. I had 600
But,
2 days ago.
But
and-
what are other resources they can go to
you
get
can-
questions answered?
If you Rebecca Greenwood, she's a new staff at the state board.
Mm-hmm.
She's very familiar with the industrial permit. So it would be rebecca.greenwood, GREENWOOD, or you can always email me. I check my emails
And of course,
every day.
they can also email or contact their regional
The
board
regional
staffs.
board.
I know here locally in Region 5,
Yes.
Rich and Bob are very good about getting back to people.
You can.
Even they are a little bit overloaded right now, but
I know.
there are resources. And then the state water board's continuing to add tools. So watch the tools box.
Yeah. And so we've added we're getting some new videos added to our webpage and getting some resources for impaired water bodies if you're not in SMARTS. So the Google KMZ file will be up, as well as the GIS geodatabase, which is the file database. So you can run your own models and everything at your consulting company or your own facility.
Okay.
And we're putting all that up so that if you're not in SMARTS, you have some ways to kind of use those tools.
All right. Well,
But it'll take some time.
Well, thank you again for joining us. And I want to thank each of you for the
Yes.
questions you sent in and for being a part of this broadcast. It's been really neat to see this happen. And if you enjoyed today's broadcast, you won't want to miss Fridays. We got another good keynote session that'll be at 10 a.m. Note the time, it's a little bit different, 10 a.m. on Friday. We're going to have 2 fish biologists with East Bay Municipal Utilities District talking about their recent stream restoration project they performed on the McCulmey River. And so we got just some really neat pictures and graphs and even a video talking about how they manage the salmon populations. And if that interests you and you're local to the Sacramento, Lodi, Stockton area, or don't mind driving in for it, we also have a live tour of that very same project. You'll get to see the East Bay Muds hatchery. There'll be several workshops Friday afternoon. For more information about those workshops, go to our stormwaterawareness.org website, the same one that you're looking at right now. Look at the list of workshops remaining. In fact, there's quite a few workshops still remaining tomorrow and Friday. And so we hope that you can come out to even some of the live workshops being offered all over the state. Well, this is John Taraskis thanking you for being a part of this Stormwater Awareness Week broadcast. We'll see you next time.